my job became my significance. And then when I sensed God pulling me out of that space, it was like he had to extract me, and get my attention. And he did. I feel like God can still use a crisis every now and then to get our attention. I went through my own personal crisis, and I do think he's speaking to a lot of us if we'll listen through this crisis that we're going through right now.
And this is CIA, Contagious Influencers of America. I'm David Sams. Wow, hasn't this just been the weirdest month of your life? I mean, it certainly has been probably the weirdest month of my life. Oh my gosh, I can't even watch the news anymore. I'm so done with the news. You watch the news at 6:30 at night, and it's like a teaser for a horror movie night after night after night. I feel like I'm in Groundhog's Day. It just never, ever changes. We actually have a guest today who comes from, of all places, ABC News. She's a senior national correspondent for ABC News. She also has a very popular podcast called Journeys of Faith with Paula Faris. So obviously, Paula Faris is with us today. She is just dynamite. I interviewed her a few days ago. Now, I have to tell you, we're in the process of sort of reopening parts of the country with an asterisk. I mean, here in Tennessee, oh gosh, you can actually seat people in a restaurant as long as it's only half full. Some retailers are opening up. Now, no, I can't get a haircut. Forget that. I cannot get a haircut. I've been shaving the sides really close. The back just keeps growing and growing and growing. I think I'm beyond a ponytail now. This is like getting ridiculous, but hey, I might as well go for it and see if I can do sort of oh gosh. Who am I looking like now? Willie Nelson? I don't know. I'm going someplace I've never gone before. All I know is that it's time to bring back the dashikis, because with this hair I've got, I think it'd go real well with the dashikis. So, and it's about that time of year. The sun is out. It's going to be 70-something today. It's starting to feel a little better. So we all need it. We all need that little bit of sunshine and a little better weather. And definitely we need to be able to walk into our favorite restaurant and order an iced tea or more. Let's go to our interview now with Paula Faris. And, her book that is just out is really a dynamite book. I started reading through it, and it's really cool. It's called Called Out: Why I Traded 2 Dream Jobs for a Life of True Calling. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Paula, she was the weekend host of Good Morning America, and also she was on The View. But she felt that God was calling her for something very uniquely different, and she's going to talk a little bit about that. So she'll tell you why she traded her dream jobs for a life of God's calling. The big one is she's going to talk about moving past the fear that's holding you back, especially in these crazy times in which we live. The fear factor is all over the place, all over the airwaves. You cannot go to sleep at night and not be, I don't know about you, the stress, the anxiety. Like I said, I can't even turn on the TV anymore. Frankly, I want to tell you, one of the best things I have done is I have switched up my morning shows, and I've turned on the business channels, especially Fox Business with Varney and Company, because I don't know, they just seem to find the brighter side of a dark situation. And they look for, that light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully it's not a train coming at us, but that's been really a cool thing, because the morning shows, for the most part, man, they're all gloom and doom. There is no hope whatsoever on those things. So it's really cool that I've got somebody from the news side of the business, Paula Faris, with us. She's a woman of God, a woman of faith. You're going to hear a little bit different perspective than what you think you're going to hear coming from a network news personality. So let's go to my interview that I just conducted a few days ago with ABC's Paula Faris. You wrote this book when? A year ago?
Yeah, I wrote this book. The manuscript was due last June.
Okay, last June. So here you write this book a year ago. And, I do these interviews all the time from folks that put all of this work and all of this thought into what they wanted to convey on paper and in print. And then all of a sudden, bam, this happens. And the first question I always have to ask is, why is this book relevant today?
Yeah. So, we can't control our circumstances, right? I went through my own personal crisis where I felt like God was really trying to get my attention and wake me up to my misplaced significance, misplaced identity, misplaced purpose, misplaced calling. And I think there are a lot of tenets that can relate to what we're going through in this moment where people have lost so much of what they've held dear, whether it's a loved one to this pandemic, whether they've lost their job, they've lost their wealth, they've lost their worth and their value. The message of this book is an invitation to talk about where our significance comes from, David, and really to discover that unrootable, unshakable, unmovable purpose in our life, and discover what true calling is outside of what we do, outside of where we have misplaced our significance. And I will say, having gone through my own personal crisis and discovered true calling and true purpose, I feel that despite the pandemic and the paranoia and the fear, that I am rooted in, and I am confident. I am confident in my faith, and I'm confident in who I am outside of what's going on in the world.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that personal crisis. Kind of walk me through that, will you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at the top of my game. I've worked my entire career to get to this particular point where I'm anchoring Good Morning America weekends. I am a co-host at The View. I am pursuing my calling, David. That's what we're taught to do, especially in the faith communities, not just the world, but we are taught to pursue our calling, and it's almost always synonymous with career. And so I bought that lie that my worth was work and my value was vocation and my calling was career. And I leaned into the things that we are told to lean into, and it's almost always career. And I burned out so hard. I took a look at what was going on in my life. And yes, I'm at the top of my game career-wise, but my professional choices were clashing with my professed values. My relationships were failing with my husband and my kids. My relationship with God was suffering. My health was suffering. And I knew God was trying to get my attention just in that space right there, just taking a snapshot of what was going on inside of me and going on around me. But it took a personal crisis, that what I refer to as my season of hell in the book, for God to really get my attention, because I knew he was trying to get me to slow down, but I was too scared, David, to take that step. I was scared of the failure, the fear of what people were going to think about me, that I couldn't hack it, scared of what I was walking away from, these dream jobs, and scared of what I was walking into. And so this personal crisis, this season of hell ensued, and I had 5 major events happen in a 7-month period. And unequivocally, I knew God was trying to get my attention. And that's when I answered. Those 5 events, it started with a miscarriage and an emergency surgery. Then I was on assignment for Good Morning America, and I got hit in the head with an object going 60 miles an hour, and I suffered a concussion. And that knocked me out of work for 3 weeks. And the day I get cleared to go back to work, I get in a head-on car crash, and then I get influenza, which turned into pneumonia. So I knew that God was trying to get my attention, that he allowed this personal crisis to happen because nothing else was getting my attention. And so it was in that moment that I decided, okay, God, I'm going to take this step. I know you want me to slow down, even though it's crazy to me and it's crazy to probably most people around me to step off the fast track when I'm at the height of my career. And then in that space of obedience and following, obeying God to slow down, David, that's when I realized my identity had been so misplaced. I didn't know who I was outside of what I did. And I had to swallow my pride, because for so long I had maintained, I'm a woman of faith. I'm not defined by what I do. I'm defined by who I am. But then the rubber met the road, and I stepped away, and I realized I was completely lost without my titles. I was completely lost without these jobs. And that was a point of, deep introspection and, just groveling in front of God. A lot of guilt because I never thought that I would become that, but I had.
So how did you get the courage to let go and just give it up? I mean, that's a lot to give up.
I would like to think that I'm courageous, but in fact, that it was a personal crisis. Like I felt like I had no other choice in many regards. Don't get me wrong. I still loved what I did. And some people, when they burn out, they don't love it anymore. I still loved it, but I was so addicted to my job and I was addicted to the wrong things. I was addicted to the accolade and the accomplishment and the achievement and the spotlight. And I just got lost along the way. I would like to think I'm courageous, David, but I think if anybody went through a season like I went through with those major events happen to them, I think that God would get their attention too. So I'd like to think that I was wise enough and brave enough, or whatever, words you want to throw out there, adjectives to describe, but really God got my attention because I was too stubborn. And, after I contracted pneumonia, I just was like, all right, God, you got my attention. I'm going to do this. I'm going to obey. As crazy as it sounds to everyone else, as crazy as it sounds to me, I know you're trying to get me to slow down.
So relating to what is happening today to millions of people, we've all had our game on. We've had our gig. We've had our jobs, our fun. And now all of a sudden, bam, here you are. You were brought to your knees. And then one day you had it, one day you didn't. How did you adapt? What can you tell us with what we're all going through right now, how there is another side to this? What did you learn and how did you get there?
I learned through humility and prayer, and in that space where I felt lost without my job, and I felt just an extreme loss of identity and loss of significance, and I felt like my purpose and calling were taken away. But it was in that space, David, where I really felt God revealed to me that I'd had it wrong all the time, and it was a paradigm shift. We talk about calling in faith circles and in society, and it's almost always associated with what we do, is it not? It's associated with career. And when there is a slight shift in vocation, a slight shift in career, if our identity is completely rooted in what we do or what we find significance in, then guess what? We're bound to have an identity crisis. I think God revealed to me several things, but mostly that calling, it has, just like we're made of body and soul, calling has two components, all right? We have what I've learned to be, or I call a faith calling in my book, and we also have a vocational calling. So we need to learn to separate those two when we're talking about calling. Faith calling is essentially your purpose. It is the reason that you are on this earth, and it is unmovable, it is unshakable, regardless of a pandemic. My purpose, my faith calling, David, is to love God and love people, and it is never going to change. End of story. That is it. My vocational calling will change throughout my life. I can branch out. I am not one-dimensional. My vocational calling, my vocation is just the vehicle. It is the conduit by which I will love God and love people. So it's the vehicle for your faith calling to fulfill itself, if that makes sense. I liken it to your faith calling as like the vine, loving God and loving people. The branches are your vocation. You look at a healthy vine and a healthy branches. There are several branches that are shooting off, but they're all attached to the vine, are they not? So allowing myself the permission to branch out, to try new things, to not see myself so one-dimensionally, to off-ramp, giving myself the permission. But it's all rooted in knowing that my worth and my value is not in what I do. My worth and my value is in who I am. And that is Paula Faris, a child of God, a lover of Jesus, a wife, a mother. I'm curious, I'm a questioner, and I will champion the underdog and champion the voiceless. That's who I am. And that's unmovable, unshakable, and unrootable, even in a pandemic. What I do for a living, what I do, the things, my vocation, those are going to shift. And again, those are just the vehicle. For me, it was a paradigm shift to just see my work for what it was, that it's just an opportunity to share the love of Jesus with people. And that's it. It's not about me. It's about what I'm doing and who I'm doing it for. Who are we doing this for at the end of the day? Are we doing it for our own personal accolades, another trophy on the shelf? We just have to remember what we're doing and who we're doing it for. But for me, it really started with just separating these two callings instead of throwing calling into one big basket where there's all of this ambiguity and confusion, to separate them. Faith calling, vocational calling. Faith calling doesn't change, vocational calling does. Your worth is not your work, your value is not your vocation, and your calling is not your career.
Take me back. Tell me a little about your early life, how you grew up, and how you got into journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up I say that I'm a Christian mutt. I grew up Catholic. Then we started going to the Lutheran church when I was in junior high. Then I went to a Baptist high school. I went to a Bible college. I go to a non-denominational, I guess you would call it a Pentecostal church now. And then throughout my entire childhood, my parents belonged to a Christian community, an ecumenical community that was Pentecostal as well. And we met separately from our churches. I would equate it to like a small group or, we met in our local YMCA. So I've experienced a lot of different denominations, but I'm a woman of faith, and that's how I was raised. And I ended up going into broadcasting because my high school teacher, Mr. Barsoon, noticed he's very intuitive, and he had told me just from drama class and my performance on stage that he's like, you should really go into broadcasting. And honestly, that's the first time I thought of it. I didn't grow up thinking I want to be a broadcaster. But when I look back at my life, my nickname growing up was Paula 20 Questions. I've always been inherently curious and nosy. I love asking questions. I love getting to the bottom of things. And, I had people speaking it into me, my college professors. So when I decided to go into broadcast journalism, they were continually encouraging me to be in front of the camera and to be an on-camera journalist. I didn't for a long time, though, until after, several years out of college, because I was so scared of the failure, the fear of failure, fear of what others would think about me, paralyzed me for so long. And it wasn't until 9/11, I had been out of college for several years. I was working in radio at the time, selling radio ads. So I was in the sales department. And that's when God really got my attention. And I felt like that dream that other people had for me for so long, I finally felt it for myself, and I accepted that vocational call on my life. And that's when I got into broadcasting. I just submitted my resume to get my foot in the door. I became a production assistant making $7 an hour at a station in Dayton. And because I knew how to shoot, edit, and produce, because I had really focused on that in college, I was able to assemble a resume reel for my news director, and he put me on the air in Dayton, Ohio, and then Dayton, Cincinnati, Chicago. Now we're, in New York at the network. So it has been quite a journey and quite a road for sure.
At ABC, at one point you had 3 gigs, 3 jobs, 3 shows?
I was doing a lot. I was doing The View, and then I was anchoring Good Morning America weekend, and then I was doing a lot with, just the other shows during the week as well. And that's, what kind of led to my burnout. I had this conflict, David, where I'm like, God, I know you called me to do this, but if you called me to do this, why do I feel like everyone's getting my leftovers? I would go through stretches where I would work 21 days straight. Now, this is not the network's fault. This is my fault, okay? Because I let this accomplishment and these accolades and the achievement really drive me to the point where my job became my addiction. And I didn't really even know. My job became my significance. And then when I sensed God pulling me out of that space, it was like he had to extract me, and get my attention. And that's he did. I feel like God can still use a crisis every now and then to get our attention. I went through my own personal crisis, and I do think he's speaking to a lot of us if we'll listen through this crisis that we're going through right now.
How in the world did you keep your relationship intact during this time?
I was working crazy hours. I was working mainly Wednesday through Sunday. My husband worked Monday through Friday, and I looked at our calendar, and we hadn't spent any time together, like just the two of us, no kids, a couple of years. And our relationship was suffering. If you don't invest in any relationship, whether it's with your husband or your kids, your relationship with God, it's not going to bloom. It's not going to blossom. It's going to die. And so my relationships around me were suffering significantly.
What path do you think you're on? Not that any of us kind of know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? It is what it is today. But
Yeah.
do you see going back to New York?
I kind of just take it day by day right now. And I'm confident that he who began a good work in me is going to complete it. But also knowing that the good work doesn't have anything to do with work, if you know what I'm saying. I know that regardless of what happens, like I'm here to love God and love people in whatever situation I'm in, whether I'm in broadcasting or whether, God vocationally calls me into another area. I feel like God has given me the permission to branch out, to not see myself so one-dimensionally, but all getting back to that foundation of not seeing my value in my vocation and not seeing my calling in just my career. So I feel firmly rooted in my purpose, and it doesn't matter anything else that happens. I'm here to love God and love people in any and all circumstances, and that's what I'm trying to do.
There are going to be a lot of folks that are listening to this who are grieving the loss of what was. They're faced with this big idea of, oh my gosh, what do I do next? Of reinvention, of starting all over. Mm-hmm. How have you faced that with what you have gone through? What can you tell them about overcoming that fear?
Mm-hmm. I think, you just look around, and we are all in this together right now, David. So many of us are suffering loss, some on a more cellular and visceral level where we've lost family members to COVID. We're losing our jobs. We're losing our significance. We're losing our wealth. We're losing our worth. And what I learned through my own crisis is to really root into who I am, the unshakable, unmovable person that isn't affected by misplaced significance, whether that's in wealth or it's in career, it's in job, it's in relationships. It should be rooted in loving God and loving people. And I think when I went through my own challenging time, God was speaking to me, and I think that we're waiting for this audible voice to speak from the heavens and declare something over our lives. And I don't think that always happens. Listen for God in scriptures. Listen for God in songs. When you're in the radio, when you're in the car and you hear a song come on, you're like, oh, I needed that. That's God speaking to you in that moment. Listen for God speaking to you through sermons and through trusted advisors and people in your life. Listen for God in dreams even. I think there's always an element of fear and faith whenever we're faced with a decision, big or small. And when I finally obeyed God and pressed through my fear to get into broadcasting in the first place, and then when I felt God nudging me to take a step back, I had to push through that fear again. And I come back to this verse, and I hope that it encourages people. It's really been the bedrock of who I am. And it's in Joshua 1. And it says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and be courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you everywhere you go. And you think about in context what was happening. Joshua was circling Jericho, just circling. And sometimes we feel like there's really no sense and no purpose, and we feel like we're circling and we're waiting. God is acknowledging, he's commanding us to press past that fear. He's acknowledging the fear. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. So he's acknowledging it. He's commanding us to push past it. And then he's promising that he's going to be there on the other side. The Lord your God will be with you everywhere you go. But we need to take that first step. We can hear God through scriptures and sermons and songs and people. We need to press past that fear, and God's going to meet us on the other side.
Well, the book is called Called Out, Why I Traded 2 Dream Jobs for a Life of True Calling by Paula Faris. Paula, I really appreciate the time that you have provided this morning, and I just want to ask you, how can folks find out more about you? And I understand you have a podcast, so tell us about that and where we can find it.
When I stepped away from these 2 dream jobs, I really felt like God put it on my heart to launch a faith podcast. So I launched a faith podcast. We've done 3 seasons where I talk to influencers and newsmakers about their faith, whatever their faith may be, just a chance to sit down and peel back the layers and see them in a different light and see how their faith has carried them through the good, bad, and the ugly of life. And if people want to reach out to me, the best way to do that is on social media, either Instagram or Twitter, though I am not the most social media savvy person around, but they can reach out to me on either of those mediums, Twitter or Instagram. And my handle is the same on both. It's just Paula Faris. It's my first name and my last name. And I want to say thank you to everyone who is listening to this. And I want to thank you for supporting the book. Thank you for supporting my heart on these pages. And I pray that it encourages you and really helps you to root into that unmovable, unshakable purpose for your life and discover your true calling in the process.
And once again, your podcast is called?
Journeys of Faith.
Fantastic. Well, Paula, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Pleasure.
I appreciate your time. I pray for you and your family, and you keep safe over there, okay?
Thank you. We sure will. Thanks, David. I appreciate it. God bless.
God bless you too. So what'd you think? Pretty cool, huh? She was really dynamite. I really enjoyed having her here on Contagious Influencers. And I want more folks like that. You know, these are people out there in the real world with real world struggles, and they're not in the traditional bubble that we find ourselves in at times in the world of faith, in the worlds of Christian music and the Christian industry. I always find it weird to call it the Christian industry or the Christian music industry. It's like, really? Nevertheless, it was really, really cool to have Paula. And her book, once again, is called Called Out, Why I Traded 2 Dream Jobs for a Life of True Calling. And that just came out from Bethany House. One thing I thought was really, really cool is when she went into the whole thing about how God was trying to get her attention. And sometimes I think that that's what this whole thing's been about, that God just needed to give us a time out, get us to sort of have a dialogue instead of fighting with each other all the time. I'm not saying the fighting has stopped, but there certainly has been a lot more dialogue and certainly a lot more constructive dialogue than what we've had over the past 2, 3, 4 years. I really welcome that. And I really appreciate you all. I appreciate the feedback that we get here on the podcast. And I appreciate the emails I get. And you know what? If you want to email me directly, I'll give you my personal email address. It's drsams@gmail.com. drsams@gmail.com. I want to invite you to send me a note and let me know what you think of what's going on, what you think of where we should go with this. Sometimes I wonder if this podcast is really doing its job, really filling in some blanks and bringing you something of value in your life. You know, you listen to this thing for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Maybe you listen to it for 2 minutes and turn it off. I don't know. If that's the case, you're not listening to what I'm saying right now. I want to make this better. I'm not making this for me. I've been in the show business my whole life. I've been in radio, television, newspapers, you name it. I was in it before it was even invented. I'm that old. But I've been around for quite some time, so it's not like I need another thing to do. It's what I tell my folks all the time. Look, I don't need another hobby. I have enough hobbies. I've had enough hobbies my whole life. I don't need another one. I'm doing this because I want to bring you something of value, something that you really can't find anywhere else. Putting folks of faith that are strong, that are people that are innovators, and they have to think outside the box. They're not just saying, well, my pastor says this or my denomination says that and my rule book says this and my interpretation of the Bible over here is not what you think it is. And it's, look, we all have our ways of looking at things, and they're going to be a little different. And it's really cool to share some of those here. But with folks who are incredibly successful, I don't think we've had one person on this podcast, and we're 60 some episodes in, that you would not put into the 5-star category of success. We're so honored to bring you these folks, and I so appreciate the feedback that we get. I can't talk today. I think it's so excited because I actually get to get in my car in a few minutes. I put a total of probably 50 miles in my car in the last 6 weeks. But in just a few moments, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to go to a restaurant. Isn't that amazing? I am actually going to walk in and I'm going to smell the food and I'm going to pick up a menu and I'm going to order something. Now grant you, they'll be wearing masks, and I've been told that everybody is like 6 or 8 feet away. It might be a little different, but by golly, I'm really tired of eating that canned tuna every day. When you're a single guy and you go through this, I want to tell you there's only so many sausages and canned tuna. I've been really big on the shakes, on the protein shakes and the protein bars. Sometimes it's just easier to have an extra protein bar or two than it is to make dinner. That's what a single guy's life has been like in the last 6 weeks. So I'm really looking forward to getting out and getting to a restaurant. But I am wearing a mask out in public, not when I'm eating, and I am going to do the social distancing thing. I'm going to be a good boy. I also have my little wipe downs that I take with me in my pocket so I can wipe my hands. I'm doing the best I can. I know you are too. So let's just work together here and get to the other side of this. We might be going through this for the next year or so. I can get through anything until it impacts my college football in the fall. If we don't have Ohio State football, I'm going to probably have a meltdown. So here it is, May, and let's just hope that between now and August, September, we've got this figured out. Hey, I'm David Sams. This has been CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast from the producers of Keep the Faith. We hope that you go to Apple and you rate and review our podcast. That would mean a lot to us. And remember, go out there and live that life in living color, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living it in black and white. We'll see you next time.